The earth trembled. Not in the way earthquakes shook the ground, but with an undercurrent of tension that seemed to seep into the very air. A crackling energy filled the sky as something unfamiliar approached. And for the first time in human history, the sky itself seemed to ripple with the arrival of something beyond comprehension. It was an alien ship, larger than any city, floating over the heart of New York City. The world held its breath, not sure whether to scream in fear or gaze in awe. The ship's sleek, metallic surface reflected the setting sun, and its sheer size cast a shadow over the skyline. For a moment, everything stopped, traffic froze, people in the streets stopped moving, even birds seemed to hesitate in the air. At that moment, there was only one question on everyone's mind. What did they want? The government scrambled. Military jets circled the ship, their pilots unsure whether to engage or merely observe. Governments around the world declared a state of emergency, sending forces and ships to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. Every major news network was broadcasting live, capturing the event that would define this generation. Then, it happened. A voice, clear and sharp, echoed across the planet. It came from the alien ship, broadcasted in every language. "Humanity," the voice said. "We come with a message of peace. We have been watching you for centuries, waiting for the right time to make contact. Do not fear us. We offer knowledge, power, and partnership. Bow before us, and we shall grant you access to the wonders of the galaxy." There was a pause. Then the voice continued, more forceful than before. "We have watched your species. You are primitive, but we have seen the potential in you. You will serve us, or face destruction." As the words echoed in every ear on Earth, a wave of mixed emotion spread through the population: fear, disbelief, curiosity, and, for a few, anger. But there was one response that no one expected. Laughter. It started as a faint sound, barely audible, but it grew louder as a small group of humans stood at the base of the alien ship, looking up. And then, a man in a t-shirt and jeans, wearing a baseball cap, stepped forward. He raised his hand, pointing straight up at the massive ship. "Are you serious?" he shouted. "You expect us to be afraid of you?" The crowd fell silent. Eyes turned toward him, and in that moment, something strange happened. A feeling spread like wildfire: confidence, defiance, and a sense that humanity would not cower. The alien ship, hovering silently above them, was now just a speck against the vastness of the sky. The man laughed again, louder this time, as if mocking the sheer arrogance of the alien message. He turned toward the crowd. "Do you really think we're going to bend the knee to them?" A murmur rippled through the people, and within seconds, others were speaking up, echoing the same sentiment. More humans, standing in the streets below the massive ship, joined in. There was no fear, no reverence, just a collective sense of disbelief that someone would demand such submission from a species like humanity. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. The alien voice came again, but this time, it was different, colder, sharper. "You dare mock us?" The man in the t-shirt smiled. "Yeah, I dare." He threw his hands up. "So, what are you going to do about it?" For a moment, there was silence. The alien ship loomed above, its massive form casting a long shadow over the earth below. The world waited with bated breath, unsure what would happen next. Would humanity bow to these mysterious invaders? Would the aliens attack, or were they really here to offer their power? But the man's defiance had triggered something in the alien's mind, a reaction that was as unexpected as it was powerful. The alien ship moved. Not with the graceful elegance of a technological marvel, but with the violence of something shaken, its smooth surface suddenly flickering and flashing with electric sparks. The ground shook beneath humanity's feet. People screamed, not in fear, but in surprise as the ship began to descend. The crowd scattered as the ship lowered its massive structure toward the ground. The shock waves from its movement rattled buildings, toppled streetlights, and sent debris flying. The man stood his ground, eyes fixed on the alien ship, his expression unwavering. In an instant, the ship came to a halt just above the ground. A low hum filled the air as a hatch opened, and from it emerged a figure unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Standing tall, at least 7 feet, it was humanoid in shape, but its skin was a smooth, silver gray, and its eyes glowed an unnatural shade of purple. Its posture was regal, proud, but its face was one of fury, the arrogance dripping from every movement. It spoke, and its voice, though not broadcast through speakers, carried with such authority that it felt like it reverberated through the bones of every human nearby. You have no understanding of the forces you are toying with. We are the Oryx, conquerors of countless civilizations, rulers of star systems. The figure paused, studying the crowd, and then continued. But you are different. You mock us. You dismiss our power. You fail to understand who you are dealing with. For a moment, the figure stood in silence, waiting for the crowd to fall into line, to give in to the pressure, to surrender. But the man in the baseball cap did not step back. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he just shook his head, muttering, "This is ridiculous." The crowd behind him seemed to share the sentiment. People were no longer afraid. They didn't see the alien as a god or even as a threat. They saw it as something foreign, something that had no power over them. The alien leader, now visibly irritated, stepped forward. "You humans are a strange species," it said. "You possess no advanced technology. Yet you stand before us as equals. You think yourselves worthy of our respect?" A strange noise echoed from the back of the crowd, a low hum of approval, like a collective heartbeat. The humans were no longer intimidated. They weren't afraid of this alien, or its threats. And in that moment, they realized something: the aliens might not be the invincible force they thought. The man with the baseball cap stepped forward again, facing the alien leader, his voice ringing clear. "No," he said, "we're not worthy of your respect. But we're certainly not going to beg for it." The Oryx leader narrowed its glowing eyes, considering this strange, unyielding species before it. And in that moment, something shifted, just a flicker of uncertainty. What had just occurred? Was this a mistake? As the alien leader hovered there, unsure how to proceed, a new question emerged. Why didn't humanity care? Cliffhanger, the Oryx leader, caught in a moment of indecision, was about to make a crucial decision. Was humanity about to be wiped out for their defiance? Or would this strange twist in the aliens' perception change the course of their fate? The answer would come soon, but humanity was about to find itself at the center of a galactic mystery that would test everything they knew about themselves. The air felt thick with tension, heavier than it ever had before. People, still in shock from the alien arrival, stood frozen in their spots. But beneath that shock, there was something else, a growing sense of defiance, of unspoken unity among humanity. The alien leader, towering over the crowd with its glowing purple eyes, was silent for what felt like an eternity. It studied them, scanning each face, measuring the reactions of the humans who dared mock its power. To the Oryx, humanity was an enigma, an anomaly. They had studied the Earth for centuries, watched its inhabitants rise from the dirt, building empires, conquering lands. They had seen them through their telescopes, analyzed their cultures, and calculated their weaknesses. The humans should have feared them. They should have cowered before their superior technology. But they didn't. Instead, they stood their ground. The man with the baseball cap, who had first spoken out against the alien leader, turned around and met the eyes of the others in the crowd. His face was calm, but the fire in his eyes spoke volumes. He wasn't afraid. There was a power in his defiance, something that drew people in. His voice had resonated with something deep inside humanity, a reminder that they were more than they appeared. The alien leader's voice broke the silence, sharp and commanding. Do you not understand your place in the universe? We are the Oryx, conquerors of civilizations. We hold the power to destroy entire worlds with a thought. Yet, you, a species on the brink of destruction, stand before us unbowed. Why? There was a pause. The voice from the alien leader wasn't merely a question, it was a challenge. It was as if it couldn't comprehend why humans didn't fear them. Why they stood so tall in the face of certain annihilation. One of the humans in the crowd, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, stepped forward. Her eyes were fierce, and her voice carried a strength that even the alien leader couldn't ignore. We've fought battles far greater than your kind could ever imagine, she said, her words ringing out with clarity. We've fought wars for our survival, against forces that would have wiped us off the map. We've survived our own mistakes and learned from them. We don't need to bow to anyone. Not even you. The alien leader's eyes narrowed, his glowing purple gaze intensifying. You think your survival means something? He asked, his voice laced with a bitter laugh. Your species has barely survived. You are weak. You are primitive. But this time, the man with the baseball cap spoke again, his voice calm but unwavering. We're not weak. We're strong. And we're not the ones who've been watching from afar. You've studied us, yes. But you've failed to understand us. You've failed to see what makes us different from every other species you've encountered. The alien leader took a step forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the crowd. Then tell me, human. What makes you so different? The man smiled, a small, knowing smile, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Our hearts, he said simply. For a moment, the alien leader stood still, seemingly stunned by the simplicity of the answer. His face betrayed no emotion, but something flickered behind his eyes. He had expected something grand, something more complex. Instead, humanity had given him something far more profound, something he could not measure, something he could not compute. The alien leader's gaze shifted. He looked out over the crowd of humans, all of them defiant, all of them standing firm. They were no longer just individuals. They were a force. A singular entity. The more the leader observed them, the more unsettled he became. There was no fear here. No hesitation. No willingness to submit. What are you? The leader whispered to himself. Then, without another word, the alien leader turned and walked back into the ship, the hatch closing silently behind him. The people watched in stunned silence, unsure what to make of the sudden retreat. But just as the crowd began to murmur, a loud, booming voice broke through the confusion. What did we just do? Someone whispered in disbelief. The question. Inside a small, dimly lit room, the woman removed her hood, revealing her face, pale and scarred, but with an unmistakable intensity in her gaze. She tapped on a console embedded in the wall, her fingers flying over the keys with a sense of urgency. The holographic screen flickered to life before her, displaying a series of unfamiliar symbols and images. As she typed, a voice came through the speaker, hushed, but filled with authority. Is it done? The woman's fingers paused. She glanced over her shoulder as if she could sense something. Then she nodded. It's done. Humanity has been made aware. A moment of silence passed before the voice replied, Good. The Oryx will not stop. The truth will be revealed soon. Prepare yourself. Prepare them. With that, the screen flickered and went dark. The woman stood up, her face hardening. She wasn't just an observer. She was part of something much larger, a secret that could change the course of history. She had been waiting for this moment her entire life, and now it was here. But what humanity didn't realize yet, what they couldn't understand, was that the Oryx weren't just conquerors, they were guardians. Guardians of something far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. Cliffhanger. Meanwhile, deep within the Oryx ship, the leader stood in a private chamber, staring out of a small viewport. The stars beyond glimmered, cold and distant. He reached out with his mind, connecting to the network that linked him to his people. His thoughts were sharp, focused. "We need to know more," he muttered. "There is something hidden here, something about humanity that we have missed. And we cannot afford to overlook it any longer." He turned away from the viewport, walking toward a dark corner of the room. There, a strange device hummed with energy, a communication device unlike anything seen before. "Activate the truth," he commanded. As the device powered up, a holographic image materialized before him, an image of Earth, and within it, the strange woman who had slipped away unnoticed. The Oryx leader's eyes widened in recognition. "She knows too much," he whispered. But even as he spoke, something else was unfolding, something the Oryx had never anticipated. The city was alive with a tension that hung thick in the air like a storm ready to break. People walked through the streets, their faces uncertain, their thoughts preoccupied with the events of the past few days. The alien ships that had arrived, their massive, towering forms visible in the sky, had stirred something deep inside humanity, something primal, something not easily ignored. It was as though the very presence of the Oryx had awakened a deep-rooted instinct in every person alive. A quiet rebellion. But it wasn't just the humans who were on edge. The Oryx, far more advanced than any civilization humans had ever known, were grappling with something they couldn't understand. Despite their unmatched technology and power, there was something about humanity that unsettled them. Something they hadn't accounted for. The Oryx leader paced in the heart of his ship, his thoughts a swirl of confusion and unease. His mind was focused, driven by a singular goal, understanding humanity. He had watched them from afar for centuries, observed their every move, catalogued their weaknesses, their tendencies. But they had always been something of a curiosity, a small and insignificant species, nothing more than a footnote in the grand scheme of the galaxy. And yet, in the span of a few days, humanity had done the unthinkable. They had not cowered in fear. They had not submitted to his power. No, instead, they had stood tall. They had defied him. The alien leader had never encountered anything like it. His superiors in the Oryx command had always warned him about Earth, how it was a planet full of chaos, disorder, and violence. They had been right about that. But what they had failed to understand was the fire that burned in the hearts of every human. A fire that refused to be extinguished. "What is it about them?" he muttered to himself, his eyes narrowed as he looked out over the darkened expanse of space beyond the ship's viewport. The stars twinkled in the distance, cold and distant. But beneath that silence, something deeper stirred. His communication device buzzed suddenly, cutting through his thoughts. A holographic image flickered into view, a woman, her face stern, her eyes filled with purpose. It was the same woman from before, the one who had stepped forward during their encounter with the humans. "Report," the alien leader commanded. The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. "We've been monitoring them closely, leader. The humans, they are changing. They are not what we expected. They are not afraid." The leader's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "We have always known that they are resilient, but this is something else." The woman's voice was filled with a quiet urgency. "I believe that they are not just resisting us. They are evolving. In ways we cannot comprehend. I have seen it in their eyes. They are preparing for something. Something we are not ready for." The leader was silent for a long moment. His mind raced with the implications of what she had said. Evolution. Humanity was evolving in real time, adapting to the presence of the Oryx in ways that defied logic. It was as though they had been preparing for this moment all along. They were a species on the verge of something greater, something that could not be stopped. "Is it possible that they have discovered something? Something about us?" the leader asked, his voice tinged with doubt. The woman hesitated. It's hard to say, but there are rumors, whispers among the humans. Some believe they are not as weak as we thought. Some believe they were waiting for us. The leader's eyes flickered with uncertainty. For the first time in his long life, he felt a sense of doubt creeping into his mind. This wasn't just a conquest anymore. This was something else entirely. Prepare the fleet, he ordered. We cannot afford to underestimate them. We will meet this challenge head-on. But deep down, the alien leader knew that the situation was far more complicated than he was letting on. Humanity's defiance had set something in motion, something that no one could have predicted. Back on Earth, the people were waking up to a new reality. The events of the past week had set off a chain reaction, a shift in the way humans viewed themselves and their place in the universe. The defiance they had shown against the Oryx had ignited something deep inside them. It was as if they had awakened a part of themselves that had lain dormant for centuries. In a small, hidden bunker beneath the city, a group of humans gathered around a table, their faces grave, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. They were part of an underground resistance, a group dedicated to understanding the alien presence and fighting back against the Oryx if necessary. At the head of the table sat a man named Daniel. His hair was tousled, his face drawn with fatigue, but there was a fire in his eyes that couldn't be ignored. He had been one of the first to speak out against the alien leader, and now he was leading the charge in this new, uncertain fight for humanity's future. We need to act, Daniel said, his voice low but resolute. The Oryx think they can control us. They think they can just march in here and take over. But we won't let that happen. A woman sitting to his left, her face pale but determined, nodded. The leader of the Oryx, he doesn't understand us. He thinks we're weak, that we'll bow down to them. Daniel's lips curled into a tight smile. That's where he's wrong. We've been through too much, fought too hard to give up now. We may not have their technology, but we have something they'll never understand. The group fell silent for a moment, each person deep in thought. There was no clear path ahead, no guarantees of success. But there was one thing they all shared, an unshakable belief that humanity would not go down without a fight. Suddenly, a man burst into the room, his face flushed with urgency. They're coming, he said, his voice breathless. The Oryx are mobilizing. They're sending more ships. We need to get ready, now. Daniel stood up, his face hardening. It's time. Meanwhile, on the Oryx ship, the leader stood before the communication device once again. This time, it wasn't just the woman from before. The screen was filled with multiple figures, all of them staring at him with a mix of apprehension and authority. What is your assessment? The leader asked, his voice cold and steady. One of the figures, a taller alien with bright blue markings across its skin, spoke first. We have underestimated them, leader. Their resistance is stronger than we anticipated. They are beginning to unify, to organize. We cannot simply conquer them as we have done with other worlds. The leader's eyes narrowed. You're telling me that we are losing control? The figure hesitated before replying. No, but we are at a crossroads. The humans, they are preparing something. We don't know what it is, but it's clear that they are ready to fight back. This will not be an easy conquest. The leader's gaze hardened. Prepare the fleet. We will crush their resistance. But we will also need to understand them better. We need to know everything there is to know about their society, their strengths, their weaknesses. As the meeting concluded, the leader stood alone in the darkened room, the weight of the decision settling heavily on his shoulders. The Oryx had never faced a species like humanity. And they were about to discover just how far the humans were willing to go to protect their home. Cliffhanger, back on Earth, Daniel and his team were making preparations for the inevitable confrontation. They knew the Oryx would not back down, but they had something the aliens couldn't anticipate, something that might just turn the tide in humanity's favor. The question was, would they be able to unlock it in time? Daniel felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The underground bunker was buzzing with activity as members of the resistance made final preparations. Maps, equipment, and communication devices were spread out on the table in front of him. But despite the chaos around him, Daniel's mind was clear, focused. This was the moment humanity had been waiting for, and it wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the future. He stepped toward the central console, where a large holographic map of Earth's major cities flickered in mid-air. The alien ships were scattered across the planet, their locations marked by flashing red dots. They were getting closer. "We have one shot at this," Daniel muttered under his breath. His closest allies gathered around the table, their faces grim but determined. Each of them had been with him from the start. There was Sarah, a tech expert whose skills had helped them hack into the Oryx communication systems. Then there was Marcus, a former military strategist who had become the tactical mind of their resistance. And finally, Emma, a scientist who had spent years studying alien technology, always searching for the key to understanding the Oryx. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Marcus said, his voice low but filled with purpose. "We're not equipped to go toe-to-toe with their ships head-on. But if we can strike their supply lines, disrupt their operations from within, we might have a fighting chance." Daniel nodded. He knew Marcus was right. A direct confrontation would be suicide, but if they could cripple the Oryx's ability to sustain their invasion, they might be able to gain the upper hand. "Sarah, are the jammers in place?" Daniel asked, turning toward the woman sitting at the corner of the table. She looked up from her terminal, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. "They're ready. We've scrambled their communications within a 30-mile radius of our operation points. If we hit their supply ships in the next 2 hours, they won't be able to coordinate effectively." "Good," Daniel said, his mind racing. "Emma, how about the alien tech? Are we ready to breach their defenses?" Emma bit her lip, her fingers dancing across a tablet. "We've modified their weapons tech. The energy shield emitters should be enough to penetrate their defenses temporarily. But we don't have long. Once they figure out what we're doing, they'll adapt." Daniel's eyes scanned the faces around him. They were ready. They had no choice but to be. "All right, then. Let's move out." Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting an eerie red glow over the ruined skyline. The city had been in lockdown for days, the streets mostly empty except for the occasional patrol by Oryx drones. But despite the alien presence, life had begun to return to a semblance of normalcy. The underground resistance had given the people hope. And now, Daniel was going to give them something even more precious, the chance to fight back. The resistance had developed a network of underground tunnels connecting key sites across the city. It was their safest mode of travel, allowing them to avoid detection while moving freely. Daniel led the group through the darkened passageways, his mind focused on the mission ahead. Each step was a reminder of how much was at stake. The Oryx had invaded their world, destroyed their cities, and threatened everything they had ever known. But now, for the first time, humanity had the chance to strike back. They reached the surface in the heart of the city, just outside one of the Oryx supply depots. The depot was heavily guarded by alien drones, but the team had a plan. Marcus motioned for the group to take cover behind a dilapidated building. "We hit them fast, hit them hard," he whispered. "Sarah, now." Sarah pressed a button on her wrist device, and a series of explosions erupted from the nearby alleyway. The ground shook beneath their feet and a cloud of smoke billowed into the air, providing the perfect cover for the assault. "Go, go, go!" Daniel shouted, leading the charge. The team sprinted toward the depot, weapons raised. The Oryx drones were disoriented, their sensors scrambling to recalibrate after the sudden explosion. It was the perfect opportunity. They breached the depot's outer defenses in mere moments, their modified weapons tearing through the alien structures. But just as they were about to break into the main supply room, a loud screeching sound filled the air. The ground trembled beneath their feet as an enormous Oryx warship descended from the sky, its massive form blocking out the sun. "They know we're here," Sarah yelled, her voice shaking with fear. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. They had expected resistance, but this was more than they had prepared for. "We need to move, now," Marcus shouted, but before they could react, the warship's weapons activated, firing a powerful beam of energy straight toward them. The resistance members scattered, diving behind crates and wreckage as the beam obliterated the ground where they had been standing seconds before. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he watched his team narrowly avoid the blast. "Sarah," he shouted. "Get the jammers online." Sarah quickly set to work, but the Oryx warship wasn't the only threat. The supply depot's doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. Daniel's mind raced as he searched for an exit. "Emma, can you override the doors?" he asked, his voice urgent. Emma didn't hesitate. She tapped her tablet furiously, her eyes scanning the screen for a backdoor into the system. "I'm in. Give me a few more seconds." The warship above them continued to fire, the ground shaking with each shot. Daniel knew they couldn't hold out for long. They needed a way out, and fast. As the seconds ticked by, Daniel's eyes locked onto a group of Oryx soldiers emerging from the shadows, weapons drawn. They had been waiting for this moment, anticipating the Resistance's movements. But Daniel wasn't about to let them take control. "Marcus, cover me," he shouted. Without waiting for a response, Daniel dashed toward the soldiers, his heart pounding. A wave of gunfire erupted around him as he dove behind a column, narrowly avoiding the alien weapon's fire. He peeked out from behind the pillar and fired his own weapon, hitting one of the Oryx soldiers square in the chest. The alien collapsed, its body glowing as the impact sent it crashing to the ground. "Keep moving," Daniel yelled, his voice strained. Just as Emma shouted, "I've got the doors," a massive explosion rocked the compound. The walls around them crumbled, sending debris flying through the air. For a split second, Daniel felt the ground beneath him shift as the entire structure seemed to collapse inward. But then, amidst the chaos, he saw it, a glimpse of something that sent a chill down his spine. A figure. A human figure, standing alone in the center of the wreckage. "No," Daniel whispered under his breath. It was the same woman, the one from the Oryx ship. The one who had spoken of humanity's unexpected resilience. Her eyes glowed with an eerie intensity as she stepped forward, unfazed by the destruction around her. "You're too late," she said softly, her voice carrying through the dust and smoke. Before Daniel could react, the ground trembled again. The Oryx warship was closing in, its weapons charging. "We've got to get out, now," Marcus screamed. But it was too late. Cliffhanger, the Oryx warship's weapons were primed, and the woman from the Oryx had just revealed herself. Was she an ally, or had the Resistance just encountered an enemy more dangerous than they could have imagined? The world around Daniel seemed to slow as the Oryx warship hovered above, its colossal form blocking out the sky. The woman stood there, unflinching, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light that sent shivers down his spine. For a moment, everything seemed to pause, time itself holding its breath. "What do you want from us?" Daniel shouted, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman's lips curled into a faint smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What you fail to understand, human, is that I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to guide you." Daniel's mind raced. Guide us? He didn't trust her. Not for a second. She was part of the Oryx, wasn't she? She had been on their ship, speaking with their commanders. Her appearance now, at the heart of this desperate battle, could only mean one thing: the Oryx weren't just here to invade, they were here to manipulate. The sounds of laser fire and explosions continued around them, a cacophony of destruction that seemed far away, as though they were in a bubble of stillness, suspended in the eye of a storm. "Why should we trust you?" Sarah asked, stepping forward, her voice sharp with skepticism. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she raised her hand, and the warship above them seemed to pulse, a low hum vibrating through the air. Then, in a flash, she spoke again, her voice softer, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "You're not the first humans to fight against us. There have been others, long before this invasion. What you don't know, is that you've been misled." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Misled? By who? Misled by whom? Marcus demanded, his voice filled with distrust. "You're part of the Oryx. How can we trust anything you say?" The woman's gaze turned cold, and for a brief moment, Daniel saw something in her eyes, something that wasn't alien, something human. It was a flicker of emotion, something he could relate to. "Not all of us are your enemy," she said, her tone low but urgent. "Some of us have been fighting this war from within. I've been working to sabotage the Oryx's operations, to turn their own forces against them." Daniel took a cautious step forward. "Then why haven't you told us this before? Why let us struggle on our own?" "Because," the woman's voice faltered, her expression clouding for a brief moment. "Because the Oryx have been manipulating your every move. You think you're fighting for freedom, for survival, but you're playing into their hands. The real enemy isn't the Oryx. It's the force that controls them." The ground beneath their feet shook as the warship above them began to power its weapons. The hum of the ship was growing louder, the energy surging with a palpable intensity. "Enough talk," Marcus snapped, his hand on his weapon. "We need to move. Now." But Daniel wasn't ready to let go of this revelation. The woman was speaking of something far more dangerous than the Oryx. A force that controlled them. "Wait," Daniel said, his voice low. "What do you mean? Who controls them?" The woman's eyes flickered to the warship above them, her expression tight with concern. "You'll never believe me until it's too late. But you have to trust me. The Oryx aren't the real threat to humanity. It's what's behind them." Before she could say more, the warship opened fire. A beam of concentrated energy shot down from above, cutting through the air like a knife. The resistance scrambled to take cover, but Daniel felt a surge of panic. This wasn't just any ordinary attack. This was something far more calculated, more precise. The woman raised her hand again, and to Daniel's surprise, the energy beam shifted direction, slamming into a nearby building, causing a massive explosion. Dust and debris filled the air, blocking their view of the warship. "We need to move fast," she said, urgency in her voice now. "They're on to us. The longer we stay here, the worse it gets." Marcus was already moving, his hand signaling for the others to follow. But Daniel was still processing what the woman had said. She wasn't just an Oryx soldier. There was something more to her, something he couldn't understand. "You still haven't answered my question," Daniel called out, his voice rising above the chaos. "Who's behind the Oryx? Who's controlling them?" The woman hesitated for a moment, then looked him squarely in the eyes. "The Syndicate," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the battle. "A force older than the Oryx, a shadow organization that manipulates every galaxy in this sector. They're the ones pulling the strings. And they've been using the Oryx to destabilize human worlds for a reason." Before Daniel could ask any more questions, the woman disappeared into the shadows, leaving him with more questions than answers. But there was no time to dwell on them now. The warship had regrouped, and the Oryx were closing in fast. "We have to go," Sarah shouted, pulling Daniel's arm. Daniel snapped out of his thoughts. There was no time to waste. They needed to survive this battle first, and then they could figure out what the woman had meant. The resistance made their way toward the tunnels, but the Oryx weren't far behind. The sound of drones whizzing through the air and the mechanical footsteps of alien soldiers echoed in the streets. The resistance was on the run, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were running toward something much worse than they had ever imagined. As they neared the entrance to the tunnel, Daniel heard a voice over his comms, Emma's voice, frantic and desperate. "The jammers are down. The Oryx have found us." Daniel's heart raced. "Hold on, we're almost there." But the feeling of being hunted, of being cornered, grew stronger with each passing second. They were about to enter the final stretch, but Daniel couldn't help but wonder if this was all part of a larger plan. Was the woman really on their side, or had they just stepped into the heart of the storm? Cliffhanger: as the resistance nears the tunnel entrance, Daniel realizes they may be walking into a trap. The Oryx have found them, and the mysterious woman's warnings about a greater enemy weigh heavily on his mind. Who are they truly fighting against? The answer may be more dangerous than they ever expected. The tunnel was dark, its walls slick with moisture, and the distant echo of boots on metal reverberated off the cold, confined space. Daniel's breathing was ragged, each step heavier than the last. The urgency of their escape hung in the air, thick with the knowledge that time was running out. The woman's cryptic warning echoed in his mind. The real enemy isn't the Oryx. It's what's behind them. The Syndicate. The thought gnawed at him, making his stomach churn. Who were the Syndicate? A shadowy organization that had manipulated the Oryx into attacking humanity. What did they want with Earth? And how deep did their control go? "We don't have time to figure this out now," Marcus muttered, pulling Daniel out of his thoughts. "We need to get to the safe house." Daniel nodded, his grip tight on his weapon. The resistance had been on the move for days, evading Oryx patrols and surviving constant attacks. But now, in this moment, everything seemed to hinge on one desperate move, reaching the safe house and finding out who was really pulling the strings. Ahead of them, the tunnel stretched into darkness, but there was a faint glow up ahead, the entrance to the safe house, they hoped. But something about the way the light flickered didn't sit right with Daniel. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. "Something's wrong," he whispered. Sarah stopped beside him, her face pale but determined. "You sense it too, huh?" Daniel nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was more than just an enemy pursuit. It felt like something was waiting for them, something that had planned for this exact moment. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, the ground trembled beneath them, a low rumble that shook the tunnel walls. "Get down!" Marcus shouted, shoving Daniel and Sarah to the floor just as a deafening explosion rang out ahead of them. The walls cracked, debris falling in a shower of stone and dust. A shriek echoed through the tunnel, a shriek that didn't belong to any human or alien Daniel had heard before. It was a sound that rattled his bones, a high-pitched wail that sent an icy chill racing up his spine. "What was that?" Sarah gasped, her voice tight with fear. "It came from the safe house," Daniel said, scrambling to his feet and looking ahead, his eyes narrowing. The glowing light that had once illuminated the tunnel now flickered erratically, casting long shadows against the jagged walls. There was no time to waste. The Oryx were closing in, but whatever awaited them at the safe house was now their immediate threat. Daniel took a deep breath, motioning for the others to follow him. As they moved forward, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with the smell of burnt metal and smoke. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly before them, each step feeling like they were walking deeper into a trap. "This doesn't feel like a safe house," Sarah said, her voice tense as they continued down the narrow path. "It's not," Daniel replied, his gaze scanning the shadows. "This is something else. Something's waiting for us." They finally reached the entrance. The heavy metal door that should have sealed the safe house stood ajar, its edges scorched and twisted. As they entered, the oppressive darkness seemed to swallow them whole. The room was vast, filled with rusted machinery and the remains of old equipment, nothing like the sanctuary they had been hoping for. But then, Daniel saw it. A figure stood in the center of the room, cloaked in shadows, their features hidden behind a helmet. The figure was tall, imposing, and radiated an aura of authority that sent a wave of unease rippling through Daniel's core. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, his voice steady, despite the pounding in his chest. The figure did not answer. Instead, it raised a gloved hand, and the sound of distant machinery began to hum, louder and louder. Then, slowly, the walls of the room began to shift, revealing hidden panels, and Daniel's blood ran cold as the floor beneath them began to open. "It's a trap," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with realization. Before anyone could react, the figure stepped forward, and a cold, mechanical voice filled the room. "You've walked right into my web, humans." Daniel's heart dropped. "The Syndicate." The figure removed its helmet, revealing a face that was almost human, but not quite. The eyes were cold, calculating, devoid of any trace of empathy. It was the face of someone who had seen the end of countless worlds, someone who had orchestrated the fall of entire civilizations. "You," the figure said, locking eyes with Daniel. "You are the one who has been disrupting my plans." Daniel didn't speak, his mind racing. This was the force behind the Oryx, the one pulling the strings. This was the Syndicate. "We were the ones who set the Oryx on their path," the Syndicate leader continued, stepping closer. "We watched your species struggle, fight, and yet, you continue to persist. You should have crumbled under the weight of your own hubris, but instead, you've proven yourselves resilient. And that is why I must eliminate you." Daniel clenched his fists, adrenaline surging through his veins. "You won't win. We won't let you." The Syndicate leader's lips curled into a twisted smile. "You think you can stop me?" He stepped to the side, revealing a massive screen that flickered to life. On it, a map of Earth was displayed, showing military bases, key cities, and human strongholds, all marked with blinking red dots. "You are too late," the leader said, his voice oozing with satisfaction. "I've already won. The Oryx will destroy your planet from the inside, and you will have no one to blame but yourselves." Daniel's mind raced. There had to be something they could do. They couldn't let this be the end. They couldn't let the Syndicate win. "It's not over," Daniel said, his voice low and determined. "We'll find a way to stop you." The leader laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed in the room. "You truly are persistent, but that's the problem with your species. You fight, you struggle, but in the end, you always lose." As the Syndicate leader spoke, Daniel felt a shift in the air, an overwhelming, suffocating presence that made it hard to breathe. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, ready to consume him whole. But just as Daniel thought they were done for, the lights flickered, and the ground shook again. This time, it wasn't from the Syndicate leader's power, but from something else. Something far more powerful. "No," the leader whispered, his eyes widening with panic. "This can't be." Before he could finish, the room erupted into chaos. The walls exploded outward, and a massive surge of energy flooded the room, throwing everyone to the ground. Cliffhanger: just as the Syndicate leader reveals his victory, an unexpected force intervenes, throwing everything into chaos. What happens next is beyond anything Daniel or the Resistance could have imagined. Is it the beginning of the end, or a final chance for humanity to rise?